Continuing with what is special about oral assessment.
What is special about oral assessment? Of course, what is unique about oral assessment is that it is oral. But what does this mean, and does it matter? Talking and writing are two very different modes of communication that mediate the world differently. Schultz, Saljo, and Wyndham, 2001, p. 213. Is the spoken word different? If we think of oral assessment as another set of assessment formats and types, we have already extended our repertoire of assessment methods in a most useful way, since we have opened the way to probing our students' understanding, to examining abilities such as thinking on one's feet that are difficult to do through written means, and to assessing the ability to apply knowledge to the world of practice. Moreover, we have seen that oral assessment lends itself to the assessment of different kinds of content, can utilize interaction between student and examiners, requires students to process their ideas for an audience, and may use multiple modes of communication to support the oral component of the assessment. These are all what might be termed affordances of oral assessment, the possibilities that arise from using the spoken word. But what about the spoken word itself? Does speech possess some inherent qualities that are not present in writing and that may give oral assessment some unique advantages over written forms of assessment? Dr. Alan Wildeman, president of the University of Windsor in Canada, sees oral assessment as providing powerful moments of articulation when the student is able to express his or her knowledge in a relationship with a trusted senior member of the discipline. They are studying private communication. Kem expresses this as the advantage of unrestrained talk between one person and another, 2001, p. 27. Plato famously argued for the superiority of the spoken to the written word. Writing would destroy the need for memory. Students would receive information, but without proper instruction, and would therefore appear to be knowledgeable while in fact being quite ignorant. On the other hand, the spoken word is written on the soul of the hearer with understanding, and the written word is only a pale shadow of the living and animate speech of a man with knowledge.
I actually really enjoy this quote by Plato. Just the idea that the shift from always oral assessment to sometimes written was, groundbreaking and not trusted and pushed back against 2,000 years ago is huge to me as we shift back from only written to now oral. We're seeing the same level of pushback. It's just good to know that this pushback is natural whenever we see change, but it might not have anything to do with the assessment itself. 2,000 years later, we're very comfortable with the written word, and we wouldn't say it's necessarily less than the spoken word. 2,000 years ago, the opposite was true. Change is always hard, is my takeaway from that one.
2.5 millennia later, Cam would describe one of the strengths of oral assessment as its ability to distinguish superficial from real knowledge through in-depth questioning. Cam, 2001, p. 27, the psychodynamics of orality.
All right, bear with me here. Obviously, this section is optional anyway, but I do feel like there's something really powerful here. So here we go.
Walter Ong pioneered the study of the transition from oral to written societies, then looked at the differences between writing and speaking in the contemporary world. Ong, 2002. Some of his conclusions may provide insight into the power of oral assessment to influence students and their learning. In oral cultures, people identify themselves with their words, whereas writing has the effect of separating the knower from the known. In my own research, many students have expressed a strong association with the words they use in oral presentations. I own the words. I speak more than I own the words that I write. Javan, 2008, p. 107. And the spoken word is associated with power and action. When you're giving a presentation as opposed to an assignment, often the words when spoken verbally have a lot more force than they do when written down in an assignment I bid. The spoken word is combative and polemical. Ong uses the word agonistic from Greek athletic contests. One student said of the oral presentations and discussion that it really does become a battle. Learning is often most effective when students see the need to argue a case rather than simply reiterate what is known. The presence of an audience is real when the word is spoken, whereas students have to imagine the audience for their written work. Students who are most galvanized by oral assessment report a strong sense of their audience. In an exam, you're just a number, but the presentation is personalized, and you're in direct contact with the people who assess you. Jolfin, 1999, p. 152. I think I need a better understanding of it if I'm going to then present rather than write it and hand it in. And that's the end of the story. I think that extra step of presenting it really makes you understand it even more. Theology student, Joffin, 2008. It is important to know your stuff, otherwise the Viva could be your worst enemy. Marketing student Pearson Lee, 2009, p. 126. In the UK Centre for Events Management, it is not only important to know your stuff, but to be able to manipulate the information if a further scenario is given to the student which they were previously unaware of. This is a typical real-life situation. Julia Tum, Leeds Metropolitan University, 2010. It made me try to be really certain that I knew what I was talking about. Whereas if no one's going to ask you a question, you can get away with much more unknowing. Theology student Joffin, 2008. Putting the oral into oral assessment. These factors may only come into play when students treat the assessment as genuinely oral. A presentation is not truly oral if the student is allowed simply to read aloud a written paper. Assessment takes on more of the features of orality if the student is presenting an argument, is not relying unduly on written supports, and is engaged in interaction with the examiners and/or a broader audience.
So just to emphasize this here, it is fine to consider in-class presentations as interactive oral assessment, as long as the part you're actually assessing is not students reading off a slide or reading off a pre-prepared paper. Now, if reading off a slide or a pre-prepared paper is acceptable, then your interactive oral assessment needs to be based on follow-up questions. But how worth it? Just listen to what these students are saying. This is a powerful medium, and I think also one that helps us understand scriptures more. Most of those letters were meant to be given orally. They weren't necessarily letters you would pass as a paper around to different people. Although the paper itself got passed, it was read aloud to a group. And so, there is this just powerful mode of expression that comes with oral versus the written word. So, all right, here we go.